Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, Modim L'Simcha. Last month, as I've been sharing, talking about, I went to visit my friend who was very ill in France and who was in the last days of his hospice and palliative care. And so they moved him to this section of the hospital, not too far from his house. You know, his mind was affected by all the tumors, and day after day he was inside this ward and not allowed to go outside. And we literally found out he wasn't allowed to go outside. He wasn't allowed to move because he depended on so many medications they were legally obligated to give him at certain times of day. So he was just stuck inside because he needed that 24-hour oversight. And his reaction to it is he kept telling everybody, I've spent my whole life traveling and I was in the Air Force and I can't be stuck in this place any longer. And I remember that even as children, he'd always loved to be free. Whenever he didn't want to be inside, he always wanted to wander about the hills and mountains where we lived, and he just couldn't bear to be inside. And it made me think about the preciousness of freedom and what a gift it is to feel free. And we take it completely for granted until it's taken away from us, and then suddenly we realize, wow, how precious that freedom is to our daily life. This is of course, one of the teachings of the holiday, a 3,500-year-old teaching. We were slaves in Egypt, and our lives were hardship, parech. But God came, and through wonders we were made free. And how precious that freedom is. And so we remember it in all of our liturgy and all our prayers and all the rituals of last week, which now feels like a month ago. We did Seder earlier this very week. And on Passover night, on that night, we try and remember both what it's like to be enslaved and what it's like to be free. And so we have the salt water, we have the bitterness of the maror, sweetness of the charoset, and we try to remember what it may have felt like to both imagine b'chol dor vador in every generation what it feels like to be in the bitterness of Egypt, but also what it feels like to be free, to finally have that gift of freedom when you don't have it. I remember one day when I was leaving my friend in the hospital, and it was the end of the week and he was wobbling around the aisle, the hallways, and his mind was not quite right. I remember walking out and just breathing in the fresh air and feeling so lucky to be able to just get in my car and drive away free and not be bound. And that feeling of gratitude is such a part of our tradition. I remember when I first studied in the Talmud about these morning blessings that we start all of our services with. And that they were, to understand, actually, they were originally done when you were waking up. There was like a step as you were waking up, you're saying all these blessings to really fill yourself of gratitude for what you have. And so even when you heard the rooster crow, it was to thank God for giving the rooster understanding to be able to crow, to know when it's night and day, because if not, before alarms, right? If not, I'd miss doing all the things I need to do. And then as you went through, you rise up and just expressing gratitude, thanking me for opening up my eyes, being able to see, for making me free and not enslaved, right? This is because there were many people enslaved back then, and for bringing upright those who are bent, being able to stand up and not have so many pains throughout the body, and who prepares the steps of human beings, who gives me steps every day, which allows me to experience moments of joy and moments of peace, and for bringing me courage and all of Israel courage, and for bringing us glory, and for giving me strength in my weariness, for wiping off the sleep out of my eyelids. And so our Jewish people are born out of gratitude. And in the Haggadah, freedom is, as we go through Seder night, it's packaged and repackaged through teachings and midrashim, because they're really trying to convey that message of how freedom can easily be slipped through our fingers. And right, the Egyptians, they tried to do everything they could to prevent us from having all the different freedoms. in the Midrash, right? They gave the heavy loads to the elderly and the light loads to the young, just to confuse all the morals, all the natural ways of things. And they tried to do everything they could to take away the traditions. And the people lost almost everything of the traditions that they'd come down to Egypt with. They still had some language, they still had dress, but they lost almost everything. And it's why when Moses told Pharaoh, pleaded with him, lest my people go worship him, and they wanted to be able to worship, because when you worship, you feel free, you connect to who you are, your identity, your spirit. And Pharaoh knew, no, this was dangerous. He was not going to let it happen, because you have to have a people without imagination. You have to have a people without vision to be able to control them. So Pharaoh refused them to have any vision. Because freedom is, one hand, physical. It's to be able to go where you want to go, to be able to leave the body, a building, to be able to follow yourself. And freedom is also mental, to be able to think what you'd like to think and express what your ideas are in the world without fear of repercussion, and freedom of the spirit. And we've seen this past year how many freedoms have been taken away and how many we took for granted. Now, tradition wants us to remember how precious it is and to fight for every freedom. As I've shared, I had lunch with Yossi Klein Halevi, my friend, a few weeks ago, and he said, well, in everything that's happening, what's important is not to go back to the ghetto, not to go back to a state where we just fear of expressing, but being out there and sharing and talking and express what we believe in our identity, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, in our universities, and to find ways around all the barriers that are there that are in the way of our freedom. And so sometimes you have to be creative. In the Passover story, the Midrash recounts, right, after the Egyptians created their decree that all the male babies would be killed, the men no longer wanted to be intimate with their wives because it was just all too painful. And the women said, we cannot allow this to happen. And they went out into the fields with mirrors and tried to woo the men. So I remember in the fall when some of us went to the March for Israel in Washington, which is the largest gathering of American Jews, according to some, in the history of this nation. I remember watching the sea of people when they were singing Hatikva, the singer who sang it, Omer Hadam. At the very end, singing the last verse, his voice suddenly went up. We listened to this at Seder night, and it was so beautiful and powerful. And as he sang, Liot am chofshi be'artzeinu, to be a free people in our land, Zion and Jerusalem. And there's different ways that over the last year and a half that meaning has been, that song has been sung, but really just the preciousness to be able to be free in the land, the miracle of it, and the people had a taste on October 7th for what it would feel like to have that all taken away, and of losing freedom to live in a war, to live in a world that's not perpetually a war, or fear of terrible attacks, and the freedom of experiencing life in its fullness, which so easily we took for granted. And then the year before, that same to be a free people was posted all over Israel, because the people were protesting and saying they wanted to live free too. And here was a government threatening to change the rules of democracy and the freedom to pick their leaders and not to worry that their rights would be stamped out. And so when he was singing that, to be free in our land, I thought of those 2,000-year-old dream and how the power of that still has something to bring to Israel and to all of us. And also that the Gazans and Palestinians should one day also experience freedom without it leading to our own demise. And how precious freedom is and what a gift it is. And when you have it, you need to cherish it and safeguard it and show gratitude for it. And when it's taken away, you have to bring everything you have to do your best, to bring its powerful, unstoppable force into the world. And there are times we cannot be free of body, we can be free of soul. And my friend, when I visited him, I've shared this part before, but At the end, the hospital, it was Easter weekend, and they wanted to do everything to help people go home. And so they did everything to help him go home for the weekend and gave all the endless medication and the pill box 10 times a day or whatever it was. And so we made Shabbat dinner for him. And he got to drive and open up the window and breathe in the fresh air as we were driving and be with the people he loves for a few days. And then he had to go back and face what all of us will one day have to face. And though we believe that freedom, and that we think we understand what freedom is, perhaps what we know is really just a glimpse. And there is yet so much more to discover in this journey of being human beings and eternal souls. Shabbat Shalom.